default. My M2. Okay. Screen display. Okay. We have sound now. Aha. Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Woohoo. Right. Okay. Good. Looks like I've got that. No idea why that. I should really have double checked that before starting. So, well, okay. Apologies. So to start again. Welcome to episode 195 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. 195 episodes in, and I still get tripped up by the technicals on this thing. Over 4 years, will I ever learn? Probably not if I haven't learned now. Today we are going to be talking about portraiture, or at least an introduction to portraiture. It is a huge topic, something I couldn't possibly cover in just one small podcast. So I'm going to give you an introduction to what I think is the most important part of portraiture, which is understanding the need for the portrait to tell us something about the person we are photographing. Now, we'll go into all that kind of detail later. Also, Robert from Texas has sent us in a picture for a bit of feedback, so I'll be telling you about that. I'll be telling you what the Smug Points system is, where the Smug Points Leaderboard is as well. So, comments, yes, I can see. So, we have comments. Let's go back and start the comments again. So, yes, April says, greetings from a mostly sunny and windy day on Long Island, New York. Robert Schaefer says, good morning from a sunny and getting hotter Dallas. Janet says, hello from a foggy Mississauga in Ontario, Canada. Susan says, hi from a beautifully sunny and warm day in Kukubri. Though I can hear the distant rumble of thunder. Yes, we actually had thunder. I noticed that yesterday. We had a really warm and sunny day here in Castle Douglas. We're only 9 miles along the road from Kukubri. It's beautifully sunny out there at the moment. Apparently the rain could be coming, but not sure whether when or where it's going to hit or not. Okay, then we've got a whole bunch of people telling me they can't hear me. All right, and then we've got people saying that they can hear me. Robert's other Robert from Texas says, howdy all from a sunny Texas. And what else have we got? Yes, lots of people now. We've got a Robert Wilson here as well, who says, hurrah. So we've got 3 Roberts in today. Meg says, hello, everyone, as well. Okay. Right, great. So we have people. We have a podcast topic. So let's make it all start. I'll tell you. Okay. Well, what we will do is basically kind of let's cross over with the Smug Points part, because it was Andy who won last month's Smug Point Leaderboard, and what we're currently doing with the Smug Points is if you accumulate the most in a particular month, then you get to suggest a topic of choice and potentially a challenge of choice as well. And so as Andy gained the most for April, I asked him what he would particularly like to talk about, and after a little bit of back and forth, it was portraiture really was his thing. So I thought, yes, it's a big topic, so I decided to do an introduction to portraiture. What this also means is I will be talking about this with the idea at the end of the podcast I'll set up a portrait challenge for 2 weeks time. Okay, so the idea of today is to give you an insight into what portraits really are, and to give you some ideas of what you might do for yourself for the portrait challenge. And I really encourage everybody to take part in it. Now, I know portraits tend to be one of these things that, unless you are specifically into portraits, it tends to be the most terrifying of all genres. So hopefully I can lessen your fears a little bit, because it's a really big genre in photography, and I think getting to learn a bit more about it and certainly giving it a go, trying it out, entering a photo into the challenge is a really good way of developing your photography. And even if it is something that you're reasonably comfortable with, hopefully today I'll be able to give you a few more insights and thoughts about how you can approach it. But keep the questions coming. Feed into the live feed, chat away, and we'll keep the discussions going. The Roberts should get Smug Points for being the majority, says Robert Schaefer. And John Harvey's joined us from Ohio, so it's jumping in late. All right, so yes, actually the current Smug Points leaderboard at the moment is sitting at, well, Robert Gullick is currently in the lead with 60 for May, with 65 smug points. Susan is running at 50, Janet close behind with 45, and Andy at 35. So who will be the winner for May? And in the top quarter for the second quarter so far, Andy's running in the lead with 120, Robert is chasing him with 105, Meg and April are both on 90 apiece, and VG and Robert Schaefer are both on 80. So plenty to play for the second quarter. Okay, so that's Smug Points. And now what I'm going to do though is let's get on to the notion of portraits. So what is a portrait? Generally speaking, we tend to think of as a portrait, the first thing we think of as a portrait is a photo of someone's face. And with that, and a kind of an identification. Our sort of first introduction to portraits quite often can be things like the school portrait, which, to be honest, very often isn't much more beyond the idea of an identification photo. Although the school portrait photographer will always generally try to get a smile or something, because parents are more likely to buy a picture of a smiling child. But let's go to this idea of a passport photo, an identification photo. So let's flick over here. Here's one I took of myself. Last year, when I came to renew my passport, I needed to send in a passport photo. And rather than going off to a booth somewhere, I decided to set it up myself. I've done passport photos for other people. I know the kind of ratios you need to get and the light. You've got to have clear lighting. Everything's got to be visible. You're not allowed to wear hats or sunglasses. You've got to have a certain gap between the top of the picture and around the shoulders. Everything in this is about identification. You're not supposed to smile. You're not supposed to have anything which is distorting the face. This is purely and utterly an identification photo. This is so that if someone looks at this photo, they can look at it and then they can look at my face and go, yep, that's the guy who's in this photo. It's not about, am I warm and friendly? It's not about, am I serious and threatening? It's not about, am I sexy and sassy? This is purely about, do I look like the guy in the photo? Right? What's the ratio between one eye and, between the gap between my eyes and the length of my nose, the space between my ears, how much my ears stick out, how long my chin is, or how big my forehead, all these kind of things. It's an identification. So if you happen to know what I look like and you don't suffer from face blindness, you can look at that photo and go, yes, that looks like Kim. That looks sufficiently like Kim. So that's what an identification photo is. Is it a portrait? Well, in some ways, it's a very kind of wide thing. Yes, it's an identification. But is it telling us anything about who this person is, beyond what they actually look like? Okay, here's a guy in his mid to late 50s with this colour skin, these colour eyes, this amount of eyebrow hair. But it's not telling you anything about the personality. Now, a good portrait, on the other hand, when we tend to think of as a portrait, something that you are either painting a portrait, or you are sketching, or you are taking a photograph of, we want something to tell us something about the person in front of us. Who is it we are looking at? Now, that's not always an easy thing to do. Or rather, it is. You can take a photo of somebody mid-sneeze. That tells you here's a person who's sneezing. But it's not necessarily particularly interesting. So when we come to doing photos, there's this idea, but there's two things we know. We've discussed at length before. First of all, there's this saying, the camera never lies, which we also know is the biggest piece of nonsense ever said. The camera is incapable of telling the truth. What we do as photographers is we create an approximate, or can even create a false idea. We're narrative. We talk about stories. We convey stories, moods, ideas to somebody else. Okay, and so the second unlikely thing said about portraits is a good portrait gives you the essence of a person, as though we only have one essence. Which is a strange thing. We can't possibly capture a whole person in 125th of a second from one angle under one set of lighting conditions with one expression. We are multiple complex people with all sorts of different moods and expressions and feelings at any one time. So what do we do about this idea of a portrait? So let's say we take a portrait like this one. So this one here is a portrait I took many years ago, probably about 14 years ago, something like that. This is a guy called Sean Taylor, and he is a musician. He is plays kind of mostly blues musician, and he liked this photo so much he ended up putting it on his album cover, his next album. And now at the time I took this photo, he was playing a local gig for which I was kind of photographer in residence. I would take a photo of people who turned up to play this thing so that they could keep a record of who played there. And it was an excuse for me. I was just kind of starting out. I just really got into portraiture, and it was a good opportunity for me to sort of practice out photography skills. Now this is a single light setup, blank background, dark, moody. And I got into doing portraiture, and I particularly got into doing dark, moody, black and white portraiture. Now, the thing about this photo is Sean he does look quite dark and moody. There's a kind of, it feels like there's an intensity, that feels like there's a kind of a moodiness really with this photo. But Sean always, I mean, he's a fun person when he's up on stage, he's sort of chatting away. He always says about this photo, he had a really long journey to the area. He was tired, he was a bit exhausted, he hadn't quite got the adrenaline rush, he hadn't started building himself up yet for the gig. And he sort of, and then there's this guy who's wanting to photograph him, and he just kind of plonked himself down. So he wasn't actually in necessarily the best of moods at the time. So how reflective of him is this photo? And yet he loved this photo so much he was prepared to put it on the cover of his album. Okay, so at the time he wasn't feeling particularly happy, but there's a certain level of intensity. There's something about the way this face comes across which is engaging. He's looking straight into the camera. There's an absolute engagement in the eyes there. Okay, is it truth? Is it a moment? Is it a construct? It's not. But it's a something. It's certainly something more interesting than a passport photo, right? Here we tend to feel like we're onto something. There's something interesting going on. Another photo I took even slightly earlier than this, and I've talked occasionally for those who might remember, this photo of my friend Mark. This was the photo that for me really got me into portraiture more than anything. I took this photo of my friend Mark. There was a single window. He's lit by a single window coming from the left as you're looking at this picture, his right. And actually he was I think he was kneeling on the floor. I just wanted a kind of floor background, sort of without any kind of complicated background. And I'm shooting that slightly down from above. And then there was this shadow on his face, and then I edited it in black and white, and I really increased the contrasts and everything else. And this photo appeared, and this kind of looks incredibly intense. This really feels like, you know, almost like the psychopath coming out of the gloom. There's an incredible power to this photo. Is it reflective of Mark? Actually, I don't think it is. I think it's a brilliant photo in its own right. And when I looked at this photo, when I finished editing, I got this. I just got goosebumps. I was like, wow, look at this photo. I've made this photo. It was light years ahead of anything I'd ever done before. And it excited me so much. It literally changed the course of my direction in photography. This point was the point where I went from just occasionally photographing people and not being sure what I was doing to going, I want to do more photos like this, which in turn led to me doing photos like this, which led to album covers and stuff like that. But this photo, but one of the key things about this photo is that it's not really representative of Mark. Mark is warm, friendly, laughs at your jokes, makes you feel good about yourself. This guy looks intense, looks maybe a bit scary, the whole photo. It's not what you would think of as Mark. So this idea that a photo tells the truth is way off the mark. Photos are telling a story, and the viewer is interpreting what they see and then placing their own ideas upon it. And then we as photographers are manipulating through our use of light and shadow, through the expression on the face, through the clothes that are being worn, we are trying to get a sense of who this person is. Okay? So that term of accuracy is not necessarily about accuracy. Portraiture is about telling a story. Okay? And this is a kind of a really intense point about it. Let's go back. Okay, let's go back again to this idea of the portrait. Let's just sort of take a moment to say, when we look at a photo, okay, we look at a photo, and our brain evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, before we were even evolved to be human. The part of our past ancestry has developed a whole chunk of the brain in order to be able to read faces, read expressions, because it's a survival instinct, okay? When you see a face, you need to instantly know whether that face is likely to be hostile or likely to be friendly. Is it one of your tribe? Is it not? Is it somebody who could help you? Is it somebody who's going to kill you? Is it somebody who's going to steal your belongings? And the same person who might be nice to you one moment might suddenly change their mood, and that something might happen. Or perhaps it's somebody who we are connected with, and if they are distressed, do we need to be able to help them? So our ability to read faces is a really important thing. But when we come across a face we don't know, our brain goes into absolute overdrive as we try and work all these things out. And there are a limited number of ways that we can do things. So the first thing we tend to look for is expression. Okay, now in a photo like this one, the expression is neutral, or at least that's what I tried to do. It's not really telling you anything. So the next thing we're looking at is probably the how well groomed somebody is. So in this case, if it's a woman, maybe does she have makeup on? If it's a man, is he clean shaven or not? Or in this case, not. Where am I? Yeah, I've got a bit of a beard, but I've also got a bit of stubble kicking around here. My eyebrows are a little unruly, but it's me. Anybody who knows me knows this is me. But you wouldn't call. But I don't look highly groomed. I'm not completely smooth here. So that, for some people, makes me look a bit more relaxed. For some people, makes me look a bit scruffy. So depending on who you are, depending on what your expectations are, these then become little signals as to whether I'm the kind of person you might want to approach or you might want to avoid. Then what else can you tell? Okay, so we've got the how well groomed, we've no expression to go on, so we've got the how well groomed I am or not. Next thing to do is outfits, clothing, right? Now, you can just about get the top of a shirt here. Again, it's not a suit and tie. It's just a cotton shirt. I've not got the top buttons done up. It's got a little bit of kind of wornness to this shirt. In fact, actually, I think I was wearing... I do have this shirt which I was kind of wearing earlier. There's a whole... So we're trying to build this picture. And when you look at this picture, you wouldn't necessarily say, for example, I don't look like a doctor or a dentist or some kind of high-end professional. I don't look like, I don't look posh. I don't look rich. I don't look wealthy. But at the same time, I probably don't look completely like some kind of tramp hobo either. But you're still limited. Okay, so... we're up against these things here. Along with those things, what else can we be looking for? What we might also be looking for then is background. Now, in that particular case, a completely white background doesn't give anything away. Or props, if somebody's holding a cup of tea or if somebody's holding a sword. These kind of things make a difference. What happens is the brain is constantly looking for what's going to be interesting, what's going to grab my attention, or what's going to help inform me who this person is. So portraiture is tying in with not just what somebody looks like, but how the viewer is going to judge them or try and understand them. The viewer cannot help but try and place this person. Okay, so when we come back to this idea then of portraiture, as in us doing portraiture, we need to understand that when we create a picture of somebody, that somebody else is going to be viewing that picture, and that somebody else is going to be looking for clues to have it and take an impression of who that person is. Now, that person might be the client, if you are doing this for a living. That person might be the client's client. The client themselves might be putting that image on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Instagram or on Tinder or some other kind of dating app or something like that. So in that case, you need to understand how the viewer of that photo is going to be taking that photo, is going to be looking at that photo rather, and absorbing it. So our job as a portrait photographer is to then help create the impression in the mind of the viewer that we want them to have. Okay, we're not just randomly capturing someone and saying, oh, that's who they are. Well, you can do that, but really what we're trying to do is create some kind of impression. So a couple of extra comments here. Susan says that's an amazing image, especially with a piercing eye. Oh, that'd be that one of Mark. April says looks like he could be a good actor. He is a performance poet, I will say that. Nadia's joined us from Fife, and Robert says from Texas, I second the other Robert's bonus, the idea of the Robert bonus points. Smug points. Right, okay, so now, one of the things, I'm going to go off too far in tangents here. Okay, let's come back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through a whole series of portraits, and we'll talk a little bit about that notion of what is making a difference, how we're going to be judging these photos. So let's say we go to this one. So this guy is actually another photographer who I met up with. I've known him for years, but last year we met up in Glasgow. So this is Ed, and we've been out and about, and I decided to take a photo of him on the street. Okay, so this is in the streets of Glasgow. So you take a look at this, and immediately you start to form an opinion. He is wearing a suit. He's got a cap. He's not got a tie on. He's got quite a brightly coloured shirt, but he's got quite a well-fitting suit, and he's even got a little hanky in the pocket too. He's looking into the camera with a slight wariness, which is, generally speaking, he doesn't like having his photo taken. Surprise, surprise. Very few photographers do. But he was kind of, I told him I wanted a photo of him, and so he let me shoot off a couple on the street. Now, this is where I've done a head and shoulders shot. Now, as well as what he's wearing, and as well as how well kempt he is, he has an expression. And we also have a background. He's not standing in front of a lake, he's not standing in a kitchen. This is clearly an urban environment. Now, we have another version, I've got another version of this, where I've taken a full length shot of him. And this then is very much a kind of street portrait as such. Now we can see the full amount of the suit that he's got. We can also see that he's even got a chain for a kind of pocket watch. Nicely turned out, fancy shoes. This is a guy who he takes care of his appearance. He's got a particular appearance that he wishes to express. We can also now see we've got much more of the buildings. We've got the sky in the background. We've got the park. This kind of sort of semi-pedestrianised street where you're only allowed up at certain hours of the day or for deliveries. Which allowed me to take the photo, because normally in the middle of the city you wouldn't be able to stand in the middle of the road and take the photo. So restricted access street, and so we're getting a bigger impression. The landscape now, the background is playing an important part in our idea of how we're going to receive this person. Okay, and it is giving us a slightly different idea than if we only have the headshot. Okay, the headshot gives us to a certain extent, and it's much more zeroed in on the face. Then the face is what we're primarily drawing on, whereas here we'd have to zoom in to see the face. But body language and surroundings are taking a much larger part of this. Okay, so that then is sort of so that notion then of when you're taking a portrait, the background becomes an extraordinarily important part of the scene, okay? It's back to this thing we've talked about before, which is when you have a particular, so the key aspect, the main part of the narrative in portraiture is of course the face. Then everything else that's within that photo is either contributing to or detracting from the narrative you're trying to express with that face, okay? Whether it's an intensity, whether it's a friendliness, whether it's an aloofness, a sense of power or energy or sexiness or intellectualism or any of the, and the whole massive wide range of potential stories that you can get out of a face. So background as well as outfit and expression and how well groomed somebody is, these things all make a difference. Okay, another thing you can do, of course, is props. So I'll show you a couple here. This was taken for a shoot a few years ago, which was a sort of medieval themed shoot. And we were in the kind of dungeons of a tower castle, and we had this setup, and we had people dressed in outfits, but as well as the outfits, it was, and you can see here that we've got a trestle table, there's food on the table, we've got the person in his outfit, we've got candles up here, we've got swords and skulls from hunted animals, and so here the props become a really important part of the scene. We've got the person here, he's got his kind of like a kind of a monk, really, or medieval monk. He's got a book in his hands, he's tugging on his beard, but the props and what have you are really kind of setting the scene for this shoot. In the same scene here we've got a bard. In this case he happens to be playing a mandolin, I think. Same table, slightly different props. Now it's emphasised slightly more with an upturned bottle, a drinking horn, a couple of mugs, a pitcher. And so as well as the candles here, the fireplace behind him, now there's much more of a kind of a relaxed kind of, hey, I'm going to strum, we're going to drink, it's going to be merry, okay? This guy, on the other hand, so same setting, only we've moved slightly to the left. He's now sitting at the end of the table, full chainmail regalia, big sword, drinking horn in front, bits of fruit, map out in front. This now looks like the knight, and they're kind of planning the next raid they're going to do, or the defensiveness of the castle if somebody else is trying to raid them. It's got everything from your kind of strong medieval knights, battles and all that kind of stuff. And he's got the look of expression on his face like like your girlfriend's father did the first time she ever took you home to meet him. So here then, you've got an expression, but the props are everything. The props are what's really making the portrait. Are these people, is he actually a knight? Was this guy actually a bard? Was this guy actually a monk? They are characters that they've created. So these kind of things become, the props around all make a difference. They all make, they contribute to the story, the portrait, the sense of what's going on. Okay, let's try something else here. So a couple of musicians then. So some of you may remember a little while back I did a photo for a band called the Wave Blues Band. Somewhere back in the archives a couple of years ago, I will have talked about this particular photo shoot. So this is Eric, he's the drummer. We're set up in a pub, there's posters on the wall behind. And here we've got the drums in the shot. So he's engaged, looking straight into the camera. And I've got lighting here all set up from, so we've got blue light on his left, yellow light on his right, key light coming down, layers of light and shadow. So this gives one kind of impression. This was Brian. Brian was the singer, lead guitarist and lead singer in the band, or well, not lead singer, one of the singers in the band. And so for here, then again, everything's telling us singer, right? So there's the suit he's wearing. He's got a bow tie look to him. He's got the microphone telling you that he's a singer. We've got the guitar telling you that he plays the guitar. Got the same kind of background, posters on the wall. So the props here again are telling you something about this. The fact that neither of these guys are smiling at the camera tells you that we're going for that kind of intense, again, moody professionalism. They are the Wave Blues Band. They play their blues music. And so you get a feeling of them probably being quite professional about what they do, quite high end. Now, completely different kind of portrait, you end up with this one. On the same day when we were doing the shoot, there was a point where we'd kind of taken a break for I can't remember, lunch or something else. So we'd done one part of the shoot, and Brian decided to sort of sit there, and he starts picking away and playing away while Ken and Davey in the background are just having a chat. And then while Brian's playing, Davey pulls out his harmonica and just starts kind of playing along slightly. And I thought, oh, this looks quite good. So I did a quick shuffle of the lights and just took a kind of quick couple of shots of them, just doing this. At this point, Davey's looking over at me, kind of because he's realised that I've got the camera out, while Brian's kind of lost in his little world, playing away on the guitar. So this then, we've got the portrait. If you could say the portrait is of a guy playing the guitar. Props, we've got the guitar. Also sitting in amongst the props is a bottle of whiskey, a couple of glasses. Now they've been put out for the set for the large group shoot. But these guys in the background also add something else. Imagine this photo without these guys there, and it's a different kind of photo. As soon as you have something else in the photo, it's changing it. Again, if he was there but the table wasn't. If he was there in a white studio, it would be a different kind of photo. Okay, so with all these kind of things here, you can see that the background and the props and the setting is telling us more of the story. It's giving us a bigger kind of picture of what's going on. Okay, let's try a couple of other things. Feel free to leave comments, by the way. I will kind of check in if there's anything you want to ask, or ideas that occur to you or something like that, then chat away in the comments. Okay, next up then I will show you here's another kind of version of this. So here's a guy called Douglas, old friend of mine. He's actually a graphic designer, but he also did printing, colour, screen printing. That's suddenly went down my head. So he had this set up in his shed, a kind of large shed where he was doing some screen printing. And so I did some photos of him. I did a portrait of him there, kind of turned it to black and white. So kind of things look slightly more moody in black and white, and we'll come back to that notion in a minute. But here's one of him in action, right? So here's an action shot. So I'm crouched down, squeezed behind the screen printing table, wide angle lens, just trying to get a nice shot of him. I've set up some lights, and as he's kind of doing this, I kind of get him at full stretch and get this lovely kind of triangle composition to it. So that was one shot. But then I did another shot where he's just kind of paused for a cup of coffee. Okay, and that gives a very different kind of feeling. Whereas this one has a kind of an intense focus on what he's doing. This one has a casual, having a sip of coffee, mulling over whatever he happens to be mulling over. Now, in neither of these photos is he particularly engaged with me. Okay, we get the feeling of being a voyeur. We're looking at him. Now, this is an interesting point, which is, and I will come and get back to this on some other photos in the future as well, which is that there are two essentially different ways of, there's hundreds of different ways of doing photos, but one split is whether the person is looking at the camera or not. Are they looking at you or not? And generally speaking, it tends to be easier to take a photo of somebody when they're not looking at the camera, because when people turn to look at the camera, unless they're trained in front of it, unless they're relaxed in front of the camera, they're more likely to start looking tense. Most people don't like having their photo taken, and it starts to show in their face. So you don't tend to get good portraits unless you really know what you're doing. Now, that's my speciality. My speciality is in working with people and getting them to look into the camera and still look relaxed or project some other kind of mood into the lens. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's got nothing to do with all the technical bits of the camera. You can be the best photographer you can understand your camera inside out. You can understand all the technicals. You can understand lighting. You can understand composition. But if you don't understand people, it's always going to be extraordinarily difficult to get a good portrait photo. And sometimes it feels like my portrait photography, I'm only 10% photographer, I'm 90% psychotherapist. I'm working with people's fears about being in front of the camera. Okay, so if you are just getting into photography, portraiture, if you just want to try it out, I would recommend probably not trying to get someone to look straight into the camera. I'll let you off the hook. You can get people looking off into the middle distance. The exception to that might be kids. If you've got children, if you've got grandchildren, especially, basically kids anywhere between sort of about 5 and 11 tend to be, they're not as self-conscious yet. May well be quite happy to pull faces for you in front of the camera. So, that's one of the ways to go around sort of getting into it. Alternatively, if you know anybody who's done a little bit of modelling or done a bit of acting, who's quite happy to sort of let you take their photograph, then these are good people to work with. But try to work with somebody who doesn't like being in front of the camera, unless you've already developed these kind of personal skills, is really tricky to do. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but give it a go if you want. Okay, another version of somebody at work. This one, Joe, who's a local cobbler and key cutter, works down the road. Here's a photo of man at work. Okay, so much like Douglas doing the screen printing, this is Joe doing something with a sole of a boot or a shoe or something. So again, if you've got somebody involved in an activity, then that kind of gives you a little bit of freedom as well. This one then was one where I've come back and I'm taking a shot of him in the shop. Okay, so we've now got a kind of a bigger scene. So the portrait here, the portrait is of Joe, but it's Joe again within the whole shop environment. Whereas this is Joe working, this is showing the skill of Joe as somebody who knows how to repair your boots. This is about him as you come off the high street, you go in, you take your shoes into him, or you go in and say, I've lost my keys, or can I get a spare one, or whatever. And now we've got boots on the counter, we've got the machinery behind, which he was fitting boots with, but he's also got all these keys back here ready to drop and change. But he's got all the accessories, so we've got the key rings here as well. He's got walking sticks here, he's got insoles. So this is very much, this shot is all about your friendly shopkeeper, your friendly place to go and get your local guy. This is the guy you build up a relationship with because he's local to you and fixes your shoes and boots. This is a worker at work. So same guy, two very different moods and feels to the shot. Okay. Robert Schaefer says, what settings do you use in the pub shoot? ISO, aperture, etc. I ask because the light is usually pretty low. I can't remember the exact settings. I think I could probably go. If you email me later, I can go and find them out for you. But what I was doing was I was using off-camera flashes for those. So I had it was a 3-light setup. I had a light setup with a softbox, so which was creating the key light. I had another off-camera flash with a blue gel, an off-camera flash with a yellow gel, and those were the ones that I was using for the portrait ones. The one with the guy just sitting on the chair, I think I just had the single light. The ISO's much higher with that one. I was just using a single light, and it was further back because I was wanting to kind of flood the whole thing. But I mean, generally speaking, I'll set my kind of camera as a default kind of 100 or 200 ISO, and then I'll stick the flash on whatever power, say half power, and go click and see what happens. And if it's still too dark, I might put the flash up to full power, and if it's still too dark, then I'll start making the ISO higher. Okay, mostly my approach tends to be I'm going for kind of 100 ISO is my ideal, because these pictures could be ended up being printed up, and if they're going to be printed in magazines or on posters or anything like that, you want as good a quality as you can get. I only start bumping up the ISO when I've run out of other options. Hope that makes sense. Robert Wilson says, be good to hear your techniques for making people feel more relaxed in front of the camera. And I also second the other Robert suggestions of more smug points for Roberts. Techniques for making people relaxed in front of the camera. I think if I go off on a tangent now, we'll be here for the next 3 hours. But it's maybe something I can come back to in the future. Because there are certain ways of doing it. But it's, yes, I'll just kind of have to, it's too big a subject in its own right. Like I say, actually, it tends to be the bigger part of portraiture in a lot of ways. But if you keep coming back and remind me, and maybe at some point I can actually do a chunk, I could do a podcast specifically on that aspect of how to rebalance. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to go off on all sorts of tangents here. Okay, but keep reminding me, and maybe it's something I can do a podcast on in the future. Susan says, can we hobbyist photographers get good results without such elaborate lighting? You can always get good results if you understand lighting. In a dark space with no light, with no external lighting or extra lighting in a pub, and your ISO is going to be through the roof. Okay, there are ways you can compensate and what have you, but generally speaking, learning how to use lighting, you either have to learn, well, start off by using natural light. I mean, for the first thing you have to do is, if you don't have extra lights and the light is low, look for extra sources of lighting. Can you stick the guy near a window? Can you open the doors? Can you open the blinds? Can you get any other kind of lighting onto someone? Okay, so yes, you can absolutely work without lighting. Then you could, but you still need to understand light sources, whether it's window light, whether it's flashes, whether it's strobes or anything else. Light is a key aspect of photography, but it's something we can talk in more detail, and it crops up in pretty much most podcasts, to be honest, one form or another. Right. Oh, other Robert's talking to other Robert. Right. Fine. So, okay, let's go for a slightly different one here. Then this is very much a kind of, and going back to this idea of a set portrait and a particular idea in mind. Now, with this one, I was working with Denise Zagadlo, who's an artist and performer. And Denise is always quite happy, because she's a performer as well, she's quite happy to sort of play up in front of the camera. And the great thing about performers, working with performers, is that they're not so worried about, do they look good? They're more worried about, does the character look authentic? And this is a really key thing. And to be honest, one of the tricks I also use when trying to relax people in front of the camera is to move away from this idea of, do I look young and beautiful? Which is what we're constantly being bombarded with. Do we look younger than we are? Do we look thinner than we are? Do we look smoother skinned than we actually are? And it's a nightmare. People go around with this sort of sense of insecurity because they don't look as young and thin and smooth skinned as they think they ought to. And every year that goes past, we are not so young and we are not so smooth skinned, and quite often not so thin either. So, whereas if you if you work with a performer, performers aren't interested in necessarily whether they look young and pretty. They're interested in whether they look authentic to a character. They like developing and playing with the notions of character. Denise is brilliant with this. And Denise, we were playing around with this idea of just of going for an intense stare. This is almost a kind of this isn't trying to be welcoming. This isn't trying to say, hey, come to me, I'll be friendly, I'll make you a nice warm cup of tea and all the rest of it. This is a kind of a power shot. She commands this space. Denise, this is her. You are there on her terms. And in fact, actually, at any moment, she might just tell you to go away. And you would feel that you would need to. She doesn't look like somebody you want to mess with. Okay. Now, this was shot in her kitchen. And we've got, you can see a couple of windows, behind her in the background, out of focus. But I do in fact have a softbox set up over on, well, as you're looking at it, on her left as we're looking at it, and behind my shoulder. And if we look into the eyes here, what you can see, you can just about make out the reflection of a gridded softbox, which is what the key light is. But there was also a little window behind me, which is also creating a little window catch light just there. But that window light wasn't strong enough to light up her face in the way that I wanted to. So I set up a separate off-camera flash through a softbox to get the light that I wanted. Now, we did this shot at the same time, under the same circumstances. We did this shot. Very, very different feel. So here now we can see much more of her kitchen and the windows behind, and the fact that this one was all about creating a cinematic look where we're looking down the length of her long oak kitchen table. This is about coffee. Now she's looking off into the distance, lost in a world. You get this sort of feeling that she, whether it's melancholic or lost in memories or nostalgic or something like that, she's not engaging with the camera. She's not. So it's a very different kind of feel to it with this one. Now, actually, that same softbox that I had sitting about here for the last one, I've now got sitting over on the right behind my shoulder, over there, and so. Same woman, same place, almost the same lighting, just I've swapped the softbox from one side to another, but totally and utterly different kind of feel. Close-up, headshot, engaged with the viewer, distant, locational, and not engaged with the viewer, okay? They're both portraits, but they're both telling us very, very, very different kinds of things. Okay, so that notion of going close up, the closer you come in, the more it's about the face and the expression. The further you move out, the more it becomes about the place and the location. The less detail you can make out in the face. So, and the body language then becomes more important too. Okay, Robert Schaefer says, I've taken pictures in a pub without a flash, had to have a high ISO, which caused a lot of noise. Yes, I took it out, but you don't get a sharpen image. Absolutely, and it's one of those things that in the end, the camera is never quite as sophisticated as the human eye for creating filtering, and because it doesn't have the brain behind it to interpret so much what it's seeing. So you are... There's quite often, in a low light situation, there's a constant kind of compromise between the amount of light you can get in. You take as slow a shutter speed as you can, but the problem is within a pub environment, if somebody's moving, then it becomes blurred. So you've got to find the balance of how slow your shutter speed can go to let the light in. Also, you might be wobbling the camera. If you go down to a 30th of a second, you might not be able to hold it steady enough either. So you might be on 100th of a second, is as slow as you dare go. Then you open up your aperture, you go to a 3.2 aperture or something like that, depending on the lens that's available to you. That gives you a very narrow depth of field. So if they can move in and out of focus a bit too easily. So you're trying to find, and then you have your ISO to play with. If you end up with high ISO photos, sometimes turning it black and white is another way that you can kind of get away with it. I've got... This may be something I'll revisit again. I remember talking back in the early days of the podcast about how to actually play with and use to your advantage high ISO. I might come back to that in the future. Okay. April says I like her kitchen. Yeah, it is a lovely farmhouse kitchen. She lives out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a great big space with an Aga type oven and big oak table. Okay. Other thing then, something else always worth talking about is, do you go colour or black and white? So for example, we were talking about this one fairly recently. I put up this picture of my daughter, Meg. We were at Costa, stop off. This was taken with my phone. So we stopped for a coffee. We were driving back from visiting my dad. I suddenly noticed the way she was kind of sitting and the way the coffee cups were in front of us. So I decided to take a photo. And what I quite liked with this was the colour scheme. Essentially, we have the warm hues of her red hair the reddish kind of maroon of the Costa logo, also a little bit in a t-shirt underneath here, the kind of warmish yellowy red of the table, the yellowy brown of the table. But then we've also got the cool bluey grey hues of her jumper and of the wall behind as well. So that kind of created a nice kind of warm and cool hues, kind of reds and blues or reds and greys kind of colour palette, which I quite liked as well. But you can also go black and white as well. Now, black and white changes the mood. Once you go black and white, we no longer have the colour contrast, so I've had to make different kind of there's many different ways you can convert to black and white, and I use several of them in different parts of the shot. But when you go black and white, when you remove the colour and you look at a photo, black and white quite often creates a slightly more intense experience than a colour photo. And part of that is because the viewer has to put more of themselves into it. Because the colour's missing, the viewer is almost imagining what the colour might be. And so the more the viewer is kind of putting their imagination into it, the kind of bigger the photo feels to them, because they're adding to the narrative. This is also what we've talked about, the notion of shadows. The stronger the shadows, when you have strong shadows, the viewer's kind of imagining what might be happening in the shadows. So very often deeper shadows add to that idea of intensity as well. If you think back to those first couple of photos, which like this one and this one, which are very heavily, they're black and white and they're dealing with a lot of shadow. These things really up the level of intensity to an image in a way that colour has a different kind of feel to it. Okay, so when you're playing around with portraits, whether you go black and white or colour is also another consideration. Another great thing about black and white as well is it's very good for kind of smoothing out the skin tones. If somebody has slightly blotchy skin, or is a bit flushed, or has caught the sun a bit, black and white removes a whole range of potential, hides a multitude of sins, I think is the phrase. So black and white's another kind of thing you want to think about. Okay, another set, just to kind of show you, talked a few months ago, I think, about this one of writer Robin Yassin Kassab, part Syrian, part English, does a lot of writing about stuff that's going on in the Middle East, a fascinating, intelligent, brilliant man, fantastic conversations with him as well. He needed a headshot, amongst other things, and so we took the photo in his, he's got like I was going to say a writing room, but it's a writing shed. He's got this like little summer house hut kind of thing out in the garden, on the grounds, and we took the photo in here. We've got the large window light all coming in because he's got like a wall. One wall is essentially entirely glass, so there's this lovely soft light coming in. He's got a kind of brown mud kind of coloured wall in the kind of plaster in the background, which is out of focus. He's wearing a blue shirt with this kind of brown waistcoat, but that of the brown of the waistcoat, nicely again, we kind of got the warms of the browns and we've got the cools of the blues, and then he's got these piercing blue eyes, which are also then echoed slightly in the shirt. But this is what, again, headshot with no background. You're entirely focused on the face, the expression, little kind of micro levels of expression. There's a sense of intensity to it, but there's also maybe a little slight warmth about the eyes as well. So this is, there's lots you can kind of read into this. Now, another photo I did then was I stepped outside and I took a shot of him through the glass. And here I remember talking about this one probably last year, I think it was. I can't remember exactly when we did the podcast on it. But this notion of we're then, as well as being able to see the books, the coffee cup, his writing table, even a little stove in the background. You can see a little bit of flame coming up from the wood-burning stove. We're aware that we're looking through a window because we've got his view, this wonderful view of the Galloway Hills reflected in the window at the same time. So trying to get that balance between getting the reflection but also getting him on the inside. And the only way I could actually do that is I do in fact have another off-camera flash sitting in the doorway over off to the right somewhere, which is then lighting him up enough so that he lights up through the glass, so that it's not totally overpowered by the reflection. But this then becomes a portrait whereby I'm trying to get much more than just his likeness, and it's not, you know, his expression is just one of kind of he's looking out into the view, mulling over whatever he's mulling over. But the portrait, what are we telling about this person? The fact that is all about the environment, and I'm capturing the environment of the fact that we've got a light and a bookcase and a study and a writing table tells you he's a writer, but the fact we've also got the reflection of these Galloway Hills tells you that he's not writing in an urban environment, but he's in a rural environment. He's out in the middle of nowhere. Now, same kind of setup. I also got a shot of him then looking into the camera. And now it's like we're walking past the front part of his writer's shed, and he's just glanced and he's seen that we're coming. He's also got his glasses on at this one. Glasses sitting on the end of the nose. Glasses nearly always soften the face. On the end of the nose always makes you look slightly more intellectual as well. So that softens his face. He now looks more like a kind of a soft, you know, the writer in the writer's room. He's got a slightly warm expression on his face. It's like you're walking past it. He's waiting for you to come and join him for a coffee and a chat about these kind of things. And then the other shot I did of him, which is a different kind of portrait again, we're now back inside the shed, but we can see the view of the Galloway Hills behind. This was the thing that we saw reflected in the window. Now I'm taking a shot. We've got the coziness of the fire. We've got his table. He's sitting back, editing, making marks on a manuscript that he's going to be doing something with. Got other little bits, you know, little rugs kicking about, case. There's, you know, a few more things sitting on the table, from his pot to his notepads. And again, so as a portrait photo, this is what we're talking about. The idea that a portrait is trying to convey something more than just a visual likeness. Okay, so we end up with this idea that there's several different ways that we can portray someone, and we can tell different narrative stories. Okay, I'm going to run on with just a handful more that I want to show you. Okay, I'll skip those ones. Let's go to this one. So here's another sort of set of photos which are going to sort of show you slightly different versions of the same person. So this is Abby. Now, I was doing a photo shoot with B20, Basement 20 hairdressing salon, and Abby was doing part of the modelling for this sort of semi-vintage shoot. And here we've got this kind of whole Marilyn Monroe vibe going. She was with her kind of blonde hair, the lipstick and the smile and everything else. And so the off the shoulder, we were trying to catch this particular kind of vintage vibe going on. And but Abby, as well as being our model, was also our makeup artist, but I'll come back to that one in a minute. So this was, if you like, so part of a sort of semi kind of fashion type shoot. This was where, you know, we've got the whole studio set up with backdrop and lights and all the rest of it. Now, there was another shot. As she was getting ready, as she was preparing, she was sticking a lipstick on, she was leaning into the mirror, sticking a lipstick on. And I thought, oh, that looked like an interesting shot. And I took a couple of shots of her putting her lipstick on. But this one is where she was momentarily distracted. Somebody turned around and said something. She was sort of glanced over and was starting to laugh. I think one of her friends had cracked a joke or something. And this has quite a different kind of feel to it. Again, I've gone black and white. And we've got the reflection. We can tell, so it's focused on her face, but we can see the back of her head slightly out of focus here. It's a very different feel to the studio setup. I took a handful of photos of her while she was putting the lipstick on, and in one of them, one of the lights didn't go off. She only got lit on one side. So this is actually her reflection. And she's putting on the makeup, but she's only lit from one side. And now we end up like those first couple of photos of my friends Mark or Sean, the blues guitarist, where you've only got one light and you're using a lot of shadow. It has a totally different feel. So this photo here, as opposed to this photo here, miles apart, totally and utterly different. Colour, shadow, mood, expression, everything. Okay, so same person, same outfit, very, very different feel to it. But just to show you, she was also the makeup artist. She was also doing the makeup on Saran, who was at this point getting her face done. And so here she is. You could have fired off a wee shot while she's sticking the lipstick on to Saran. So you can see here then that again, playing, that different kind of sense of, are they engaged in an activity? Are they look with somebody else? Are they looking at you? Are they looking at the mirror? Are they looking elsewhere? How's the lighting? Is it black and white? Is it colour? What other clues are giving you? If it's a black background, it's not telling you anything, or a pink background, it's not telling you anything. But then that background of the hairdressing salon is telling you something. Okay, so it's giving you a very different feel. Now, almost finally, for those who were looking at the photo that I was advertising this podcast with, a picture of an artist or musician, creative in many different ways, called Hope London. And the photo I want to start with here is actually, this is Hope's photo. Okay, so I did a shoot with Hope where she wanted to recreate some photos from her childhood. So this is Hope when she was a child sitting at the piano. And she wanted us to create a set of photos. She had this and she had other photos, and we did a set of them. She wanted a modern photo taken from kind of the same angle, but with who she is now, but reflecting, doing a kind of an updated version. And so I did this version. Okay, so here's Hope now, some several decades later, sitting at a piano, same kind of hand. Obviously she's taller, but she's got her hands resting on the piano rather than playing the keys, because she's trying to reflect that bit. We've got the piano from the same angle. Obviously it's a different room. I've tried to create similar kind of lighting from here. There's obviously a light up on top of the piano, which is kind of coming down, or there's a window light. I've put an off-camera flash up over the top left here to light her in a similar way. And then I've kind of given it the same kind of sepia colour scheme to tie in with. I've also degraded the image to try and tie it in a little bit more. So I've actually added noise to this, and I have sort of added a bit of blur as well, so that it looks like a less high resolution photo. So I did this version for her because she was going to be placing these photos where she was going to be sticking the old one and the new one up on the wall together side by side, along with a few others for similar version that we did. But this photo I also liked, and I wanted to see if I could do a slightly more cinematic version with the same file. And I did this one. And this is the one that I was using on the cover of this podcast to advertise this podcast. So this photo then, out of context from her original photo, I just still liked the idea of creating something. There's a fantastic engagement with the camera with Hope here. She's this absolute eyeballing straight into the lens. No apologies, no sense of kind of give, acquiescence, nothing. She's not trying to appeal to your sense of comfort or anything like this. This is about her owning her space, sitting at this piano. And here I've gone for the colour scheme. We've got the greys, the blacks, and the blue denim that she happens to be wearing. We've not got pops of green or orange or yellow or red or anything like that. It's a very kind of muted colour scheme in that sense. And I've also gone for a cinematic crop because I wanted that kind of really wide sense of something slightly more epic, even though it's still quite intimate at the same time. So that's about the idea of how you can take the same image, that image and that image, and edit them into entirely different ways to create a different way. So even the same photo with a portrait, you can do something else with. So hopefully then this has given you some more ideas to play with. Is the fact that portraiture if you can find somebody who's going to allow you to take their photo, there's a million different ways that you can go about it. And I think you can have a lot of fun with it. And it's about, get away from the idea that you have to get a photo that looks like this person and represents them and is somehow truthful and honest to this person. Forget that. Say, what narrative, what story do we want to portray? Which aspect of your personality, of this personality, do we want to emphasize? Do we want to emphasize the fact that sometimes they are strong and commanding, or sometimes they are warm and friendly, or sometimes they are thoughtful and intellectual, or sometimes they are wild and wacky? Or do we want to create something else entirely, which is quite contrary to the usual personality that they project? Can we create a character? Can we create somebody who looks like they might be a character in a movie or a book or a theatre production or something like that? That's really where the fun goes. Okay, a couple more. What are comments here? April says human beings change their look in time more than any other living creature in the world. And Meg says, I really like the diagonal line of the piano and a nice little piano emoji. Robert says, April, humans deal with more crap than any other living creature. That's possibly, I think mentally probably, yes. But yes, we grow and we change, and but even within any particular moment, you can change from an intense face to a warm, friendly face. To one flooded with tears, you know, if I stubbed my toe just now. Or one full of pain if suddenly my back decides to go twang, or something like that. So, that kind of thing. One of the other things to say, though, is sometimes, no matter what you do with all the brilliance of your setup, with your lighting and your composition, everything else, content can trump all. Okay, so if we take a look at this photo of me, my brother and my sister, was taken 3 or 4 years ago. No, actually 5 or 6 years ago, in fact. And this was taken with a phone under very poor lighting conditions, and the quality is awful. The quality is, you know, you can see there's noise. It's an absolutely awful. Neither my brother nor my sister wanted to be in the shot. I'm saying, hey, let's do a selfie of the three of us. We don't get the three of us together very often. Yeah, right, Kim, okay. You know, didn't really want to be there. So, and yet, this photo is priceless, especially because my brother over on the right died just before Christmas. So, there aren't that many photos of me, my sister and my brother together as adults. I do have one from a year or so before he died, but this is a kind of, you know, within the last realms of one of the last photos I have him. So even though the technical quality of this photo isn't great, the emotional quality of this photo is huge to me, and maybe to my sister, not to anybody else necessarily. But there's the other thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes the photo for all the fact that I've spent years now, hundreds of podcasts running through all these different things you can do with composition and lighting and technicals and adjusting your camera and editing and everything else. Sometimes actually a photo is about a gateways to memories, and that actually just getting something is the most important thing of the lot. However, if you're talking about capturing something which you're wanting to put out there for other people, then it becomes important that there's something about this photo that's going to appeal to other people to look at. Okay, so with all this in mind, I'm setting the portrait challenge. Hopefully I've given you lots of ideas here. It's about understanding that a portrait needs to convey a message, needs to convey a feeling, a mood, a story, something about, so that the viewer feels like they have a sense of who the person is in front of them, beyond just what they physically look like, just beyond just an identification photo. Okay, so what will help that is the expression on the person's face, the kind of grooming that they have with the makeup, clean shaven, whatever. The outfit that they happen to be wearing, the backdrop, whatever location that they happen to be in, and any props, whether it's a piano or a drinking horn or a hat or anything like that will have. So if you take these things into consideration when you're arranging the portrait, what are you telling the viewer about this person? Okay, and it can be an accurate thing, or as accurate as you can. This person happens to be a really warm, fun-loving person who loves playing chess, and so you stick them in front of a chessboard with a smile. Or it can be something which is completely different and nothing like them and is entirely made up and fantastical. Entirely up to you. But use your skills and everything we've talked about and everything you're trying to learn in terms of your understanding of composition, of light, and your editing skills in order to create and to intensify that narrative that you want to project. So that then is your challenge for the Portrait Challenge, and we'll in 2 weeks' time we'll take a look through these photos. Okay, now next week I won't be here. We're not having a podcast because it's Spring Fling. Spring Fling is an open studio event in the area. If you happen to be in the area, if you happen to be coming to southwest Scotland or in or about it, then come and visit me, Studio 51 on the Pink Route. Take a look at my social media. Keep an eye out. This week I will be posting where to find me, what kind of things you can expect. I'm going to be sticking fun images up on the walls that nobody's seen yet. I'm going to be doing photography demonstrations, and I'm going to have an exclusive special offer as well, money-saving offer for Spring Fling visitors only. This offer isn't going beyond the Spring Fling weekend, so if you want to take advantage of it, come along and see me in person. Okay, so that's all going to be going on. Now, I'm aware time has run on more than I wanted it to, but I have also promised that I would give a little bit of feedback on Robert's picture. So Robert, let me find now Robert's photo, and Robert sent in this image. Okay, so this is the feedback section. Make sure if you're wanting feedback on your photos, send me your images, tell me what it is you're struggling with and what kind of feedback you're looking for. And Robert said, I've already submitted this to the Dallas Camera Club May contest. However, I'm not sure it doesn't look overcooked. I used the burn technique to create more micro contrasts. This was with the small 10 pix or less brush. I wanted to bring out the character in the turkey's face without affecting the rest of the photo. Also, I'm not sure if the vignette is too much. It's always distracting if it is too much. So Robert's found this turkey, taken a shot of it. He's edited it to try and bring out the texture in the face and the feathers. But he's wondering whether he's kind of overcooked it a little bit. So what I will do now, what Robert did, which is always wonderful, worth doing. If you're going to send me an image for feedback or critique, then if you can send me the raw image, that certainly makes my life a lot easier. So Robert sent me the raw image here, and here we can see that here's the completely unedited image. We've got our turkey. It's ISO 1250, so there's bits of noise in here, though he's not doing too badly, all things considered. Taking 320th of a second, f7.1. More blur there than I would have expected for that, but he's also using a 100 to 500 millimeter camera, so his 500 millimeter lens is full at quite a distance. So because he's using a zoom lens, it's compressed your depth of field. So even though he's got a 7.1 f-stop, there's still quite a lot of bokeh in the background. So what we will do with this is just, first of all, what I tend to do, especially if you've got a high ISO, while we're in Camera Raw, I will just go to Detail and up the luminance a little bit, say 18 to 20, something like that, and that helps soften, gets rid of some of the noise, but without at this point losing too much detail. And then what if I just straightforwardly go to Auto, and that brightens up the background a bit too much. Now I'm not wanting to do that, so I'm going to take the auto off here. What I want to do is, this is about the turkey, so we want to try and make sure it stays that way. So at the very least, if I go to the light here, I'll bring the shadows up a touch, not too much so that I make the background too bright, but I do want to bring a little bit out of the shadows on here, because we're going to come back to that. So let's just click open with this. Okay, so first of all, what I would say is we want to take a look at the crop. Now, Robert's original crop is probably, I don't know if he's even cropped it at all, but I would say if I would want to bring this in a little bit, I don't think we necessarily need that tree over on the right, and I think we want to have, we don't need too much background. This photo is about the turkey. Now, we want some background. I think something like that's too close. So maybe we come slightly bigger, something like that. Pull this over. You don't want to be complete. You don't want to be rule of thirds with the head, because all the body is off to the left. So I would say, well, not having it center, maybe something like that, so that it's off center. Well, the head is pretty much in the center, but the rest of the body goes behind. So there's still plenty of space to the front. And I would say a crop something like that is probably going to give us, feels like we're a bit closer to the turkey. You've got a high resolution camera, it can happily cope with that. We've not lost much in the crop. Okay, now the next thing we might want to do here, I think, is about the notion of selecting the subject and blurring the background a bit more. You see, the part of the problem we have here with this one is, while you have upped the detail on the probably the clarity tool and what have you on the turkey, it's also tended to kind of overdo the background as well. I mean, if I just, let's duplicate that layer, go into Camera Raw, and if I take the clarity bar, for example, and do something like that, maybe bring the shadows up a little bit more, then what happens is we've got nice kind of sharp turkey, but also this background is also become stronger and more contrasty as well, and actually we want less of that. Now, one of the things we talked, I think, was it last week or the week before? I can't remember exactly, Robert. I think it was maybe last week. We talked about the Photoshop now does in fact have a kind of a lens blur technique. So what we can do here is, if let's go back to Camera Raw, and if I go to lens blur and apply here, now that's just working its way round. And what we can see here is I can just blur that background a little bit more. Okay, so now those trees in the back, and it's been incredibly good at selecting the subject. Now it's missed a bit in there. It's not absolutely perfect, but actually, it's really not too bad at all. So something like that is actually now allowing us to blur the background a little bit more as well. So if I do that, so you can see now, no, wrong one. If I move in here, from that to that is helping us to make the subject stand out that little bit more. Now, what I might do if I want is just go in and grab the blur tool here and just smooth out this inner bit here, because the outer bit is much smoother. Now, we do then actually run into a slight problem here, which is, I'm just doing this very quickly, you can take more time to do it, which is now there is a sense of there's more noise on this, and the blur here has virtually no noise. So what we could do here is, let me duplicate that again for a moment, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some noise, because we want to kind of make sure that it matches up with the turkey. So if I go to filter, but straightforward noise tends to be too noisy. So if I add that at 3, that's kind of looking a bit more. So I'll click OK, except for what I'll do then is I'll also just blur that noise slightly, Gaussian blur, but take that down to something like 1.5, 0.5. Yeah, and that creates a little bit of noise, soft noise. Now, the problem is it's done the whole thing. We're not wanting the whole thing. So what I can do again here is if I come to here and I go to select subject, this will once again, rather wonderfully, select the subject. What I can also do now is, if I hold down the Alt key, yep, I can just take that bit out. So we've got the subject. Now you can come in and do it slightly more detailed as you want. Now I've got the subject, I will go back to this bit here, and I will, now is it mask or is it inverse mask? Wrong one. Hit the inverse mask. So now what I've done is we've got the blurred background, but without, sorry, the added noise and blur texture without doing it to the So you can see here, we managed to get the blurred background, but the noise level is fairly similar rather than it just being completely smooth like that. Okay, so that's given us a sort of slightly more in-keeping kind of feel to it. Now, if we wanted, what we could also do is maybe even darken down the background again a bit. If I took the curves and just drag that down, and then what I could do is, well, if I just duplicate that layer, mute that for a moment, and then grab that mask, replace the layer mask. So now what's happening is, again, we've kept the subject the same amount of lightness, but we've darkened the background a little bit more. So this, between the blurring of the background and the darkening of the background, the turkey is standing out a little bit more. Now, the turkey itself might in fact be just a little bit too dark. So what I could also do is, if I want, I can go back to select the subject. Let's copy and paste. So I've got, and I'm on a separate level. Take this one into camera filter, and if I want, I can then maybe bring up the shadows a little bit more. So we can see a little bit more detail. Maybe then, if I want, I can also do with the effects, I can give it slightly more texture, slightly more clarity, but I will have to take a little bit more noise reduction because adding those things in has tended to start to overcook it slightly. So now I can click OK, and there we go. We've managed to brighten that turkey up a little bit. Now, if you wanted, you could go in and then sort of just do bits and pieces around the edge. But in essence, this is kind of where we're at. Now, if we want, we can then add in a little bit of vignette and what have you. But I think the key point here, Robert, is to actually use the tools to remember that the key narrative to your picture is the turkey. We only need as much of the background to know that it's in that background. That extra bit of tree or bush or whatever isn't necessarily adding anything more to the narrative. After that, the focus has got to be on, we don't want it to be distracted by other elements like background trees, which are just a bit too kind of textured. We're wanting the turkey to stand out against that background texture. One last thing I might do here, just check the levels. Yeah, levels are quite dark here. I could maybe bring that up a little bit, something like that. But I would need to be careful that I don't, or I might need to mask back in some of the head so it doesn't get too dark. But, excuse me. So overall, Robert, I think something like this is really going to kind of give you your a better sense of your editing. Remember, the key aspect of editing is what's the key part of the thing you're trying to sell or trying to show. In this case, the turkey. Enough background to be able to support the narrative, but you don't want the distraction of other elements getting in the way. So how do you minimize those distractions? In this case, making them darker, blurring them. Blurring them too much by just using the blur, though, can set off this difference between the noise levels. And if the blur is too smooth and your subject has still got a bit of noise to it, then you adding a little bit of extra noise to the blurred subject helps to even it out, makes it look a little bit more natural. Sorry about that, wrong one. I hope that gives you some reasonable information on that one. Comments. Robert Schaefer says, great session, Kim. Robert says, I didn't know about the luminance. Yes, luminance is essentially a kind of getting noise reduction a little bit. Always worth playing with. April says she likes the turkey photo. And Robert says, appreciate the tutorial. These are great techniques for the editor. We'll go back and follow them step by step, make sure I got them. Thanks for the help. Okay, excellent. Right, well, thank you, Robert, for sending that in. Thank you to Andy for suggesting the idea of portraits. If you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, invite your friends along. So finally then, just to remind you, next week there won't be a podcast because I'm at Spring Fling. If you happen to be in the area, come visit me, Studio 51 on the Pink Route. Watch my local media, social media to get more details about that. You can also visit the Spring Fling website, spring-fling.co.uk. And it's not just me, there's 104 artists in total, artists, makers and creators taking part in Spring Fling. So loads and loads to see over the weekend. You'll never fit everything in, but if you can, make sure you do come and visit me just outside Castle Douglas. And so now think about your portraits, who you're going to grab, who's going to help you, create something, and then get your image into me before 2 weeks. I mean, try and get them into me by the Thursday or the Friday, the Saturday at the absolute latest. But the longer you leave it, the less able I am to guarantee that I can fit them into the podcast. But in 2 weeks' time, we'll take a look at all the entries. Send me your images and tell me a bit about the image. Tell me a bit about that you send me. Tell me what it is, why it is, and any interesting little anecdotes or stories behind the photo. Difficulties you ran into, or just ideas about why you decided to approach it a different way. And we'll share this, because these podcasts are about sharing it's not just about me telling you what to do, it's about the collective experience as well. So when you share these things about problems you ran into or interesting ideas, they can spark ideas in your fellow photographers as well. Okay, so great. Thank you once again to everybody. Look forward to seeing you all in a fortnight. Take care.